Welcome everyone. Bonjour et bienvenue to Cosentino's Global Kitchen Study Post-COVID webinar. I am Suzy Margorian, your moderator for today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Architect Design Sales Manager here in the Cosentino area, and I used to be the showroom manager for the Toronto showroom for the past 3.5 years. I am very excited to be having this dialogue with our very talented and busy panelists. We've got Theresa Casey, who's one of our Canada's top interior designers. We can find her work across Canada and the United States. She's been honored with a Gold Award of Excellence from ARIDO, the Association of Registered Interior Designers of Canada, and IDC, the Interior Designers of Canada as well. Her work has been widely published, and she has been chosen as a top interior designer by Toronto Life magazine, House and Home magazine, the Globe and Mail, and the National Post. Garrow Kedigian is a native of Montreal, is an architect by trade, based in New York since 2000, where he established his own design firm in 2001, and now works both in NYC and Montreal. His work has been featured in national and international publications such as House Beautiful, Traditional Home, New York Spaces, Architectural Digest, as well as House and Home magazine. Garrow has had many appearances on the popular open house NBC New York, which included a feature on his own apartment, several other projects, and our very own House and Home featured his Montreal pied-à-terre, I think it was last year. Last but not least, Trevor Kruse has a 35-year career as an interior designer and a volunteer on provincial, national, and international boards, and was recently appointed Chief Executive Officer of Interior Designers of Canada. Congratulations, Trevor. We are so excited for you. IDC represents more than 5,000 members, including interior designers and related professionals. Trevor's personal and professional priority has always been to strengthen and promote the profession of interior design in Canada and around the world. So before we start on the topic of global kitchen study, just wanted to give you a little background regarding the study. So under the Cosentino umbrella, we have many different components. We have Southstone, Decton, and Senza. One of the components is the Southstone Institute. And what that is an international platform dedicated to the study and sharing of knowledge regarding the subject of the kitchen related to its design and use of space. One of our recent studies, the Global Kitchen Project, now has 2 volumes where internationally renowned experts across various disciplines, industry professionals, and users from different countries analyze the space we call the kitchen. The first study, Domestic Kitchen in the Era of Globalization, pointed out some of the key future trends, including the kitchen as the center of the home. It analyzed the centrality, what it means for the family daily life, how it transforms the architectural conception of housing, the technological advances, new forms of integrated communication, and how it influences personal health and well-being, and lastly, what impact it has on the environmental awareness. The second volume was just sort of a touch base on these future trends, what the status was, and if there's anything more developed. But today we're going to be discussing how these changes and as well how families are adapting after COVID and how the design experts are helping them achieve this. So my first question, and I will address this to all the panelists, we'll start with ladies first, Theresa Casey. The studies pointed out there is a centrality in the kitchen, and the space is now being used for other activities. Does that mean it will continue to be the center of the home, especially in open concept? Or will this change in light of COVID and where we see parents and adults and students sharing the space for work and school? What do you think, Theresa?
Well, Suzy, I think that it will continue, the kitchen will continue to be the center of the home. But I do think with COVID, I think that we are asking a lot more of our homes. And one of those things is to have multi-users using the space at the same time. And there's a project that I did recently that was in a condo where we divided the kitchen off with a screen. And the image that you see up, the brass screen has been pushed to the perimeter of the archway. And in the next one, you'll see where it is, in the next slide, you'll see where it can be pulled across so that you divide the spaces. So in essence, you're still having an open concept, but there's flexibility in the space to, like, if somebody is working at home at that dining room table, they can close off the kitchen, or if someone's preparing food inside the kitchen, then kids can be doing homework. So I think that that's one of the things that I'm seeing is a requirement for flexibility for these. Well, what we're currently seeing is new requirements for home design.
So still open concept, but you have to have more flexible elements to it.
Yeah, and open concept isn't for everyone. But if you do like that idea, then I think that being flexible within that space is the way to go.
And how about you, Garrow? What do you think?
Well, I completely agree with Theresa, and definitely have seen, obviously the trend of the open kitchen and the kitchen being the central, hub of home living has predated COVID, but has sort of become more accentuated now. But I do see a little bit of a trend in terms of setting different moods. So, for instance, I have a client that we had designed a fairly extensive homework area in the kitchen. And this was before COVID, and the kids were doing homeschooling there. And one of the things that she actually asked me to address was lighting. So she wanted to revisit the way the kitchen was illuminated so that the kids can have a homework setting. So it's a little bit more of an ambient light setting, which is a little gentler than the sort of the brighter kitchen lighting setting of the main work area. So that was interesting, and I agree with Theresa. I don't think open living style is for everyone. A lot of people have said, I really need I need a spot where I can go and actually concentrate on my work. So in another instance, I had a client who essentially turned a guest bedroom into an office space only because she couldn't be in the same room as everyone else who's also working from her family. Fridge. Yep.
Understandable. Trevor, how about you? What's your take on this? Oh. Trevor, we can't hear you.
Now, can you hear me?
There you go.
Yes.
Sorry about that. I've been on so many Zoom calls today that I have become one with my mute button. I would say very similar experiences. I primarily worked in high-end residential and residential development for the last 30 years before I took on this CEO position. And I've seen sort of the migration of a whole bunch of smaller rooms that were next to the kitchen becoming more space inside of the kitchen. And recently, I would say in the last couple of years, we've been kind of creating a separation of some of that space adjacent to the kitchen. So for example, we've done several homework rooms, which are basically a wall of industrial glass doors so that the parents who are working in the kitchen or talking or whatever they're doing in the kitchen still have full sight lines to everything that's going on in a room adjacent to them, but separated by this glass partition, so that multifunctions can take place, different noise levels can happen, and everyone can accomplish what they need to accomplish.
Well, I would have never thought in a residential setting that parents would want a glass partition, but that's great. You can keep an eye on your kids and do what you have to do, and everybody's got their space, which is amazing. That's good. Another point is health and well-being is even more important than ever. The study mentioned also the cultural imperative, as it's called. It highlights that the kitchen will be a better reflection of how people live. their lifestyle and local community. It will focus on diversity and awareness of the user. From your perspective, do you take into consideration the end user's culture or cultures when creating the design and selecting materials? Why don't we start with Trevor this time?
I think if you don't take those kinds of things into consideration, you're not fully providing the best possible service you can for your clients. Any kind of cultural touch point that I think you can pull from their history, their experiences, or their day-to-day life actually makes for a better project. We can make every project look similar or the same. And I think, my career has always been built around not having it look like the projects were a manifesto for my career, but I wanted every client to feel like there was never a designer there, that it was something that happened over time. Their collection of things were just became this beautiful space. And that's really how I've tried to approach every project. We've done a lot of work I'd say the last 10 years, for example, with Orthodox Jewish clients. And the considerations that are required to respect all of the requirements in a kitchen of that type is, you just couldn't do it without considering their cultural and religious specificity.
Absolutely. And in that also maybe sometimes varying degrees. So you can't just assume that's what they want. You have to hear kind of what they're actually going to use the space, how they're going to use the space, and to what degree as well. So very well. How about Garrow?
Yes, absolutely. Completely agree with Trevor. And, definitely my mantra is also the concept of layering a space and making it feel as though the designer was never there. And that's actually the beauty of doing, sort of bespoke work that really pulls out the personality of the client. So, that really should be the essence of why a client hires a designer, is that, they don't know how to design a space that suits them the best. But the designer's assignment really is to understand the client and get into their minds and pull out from them the actual end product of the design that really reflects their personalities and their culture. And actually, just as Trevor said, I am actually working on a large project in Toronto now, and they're Hasidic, and they have very specific requirements for their kitchen, and it's actually a lot of fun to be able to understand how they live in their space, how it functions. So I think it is the essence of good design. Honestly, I think that it is true. I a lot of times. Actually, just the other day, I was on the phone with a client, and she said, I noticed that you specified, brushed nickel for the cabinetry hardware, but on the hood we have brass. She's like, is that a mistake? And I'm like, actually not. And I consciously did that. And I find sometimes that spaces that are obsessively matched in terms of finishes are a little bit too sterile. So the undertone there was for me to have the island look like a piece of furniture that had been brought in, and it was like she was surprised by it, and when she thought about it more, she's like, wow, I think that's really the right decision. So
well, it's all in the details for sure.
Yeah.
Theresa, what's your take?
I would completely agree with my fellow panelists, and say that I think that meaningful spaces for our clients are ones that they relate to, that reflect who they are. And, if your cultural background, whether it's important to you or not, that should come through. Like one example I would say is that I worked with a young Oriental couple a few years ago, and they had done a lot of traveling. They were very sophisticated. So they wanted to have a contemporary space, but they also wanted to have some references to their background. So in this project, for instance, in their master ensuite, you can see the contemporary elements in the freestanding tub, but what is the real showstopper is a cherry blossom hand-done wall panel that is really the focus for that room. And we go, there's a few more photos, I believe, of this project. So that in subtle ways and some different ways, like for instance, in the master bedroom, the materials of this 4-poster bed, the reference is for bamboo, which would be a typical material. And even the fabrics and wallpaper all have a delicate oriental theme to them. And I think that there might be another one even in the kitchen. Very contemporary, but there's a softness and with the materials that I selected, it was what they wanted. And I think that's what we are trying to do, is to make visible what maybe they can't articulate. That's as Garrow so rightly said, that's our job, is to interpret for them what they aren't able to do themselves.
You know, I remember that project. How many years ago was that? Years ago.
Yeah.
And it looks timeless. So I've seen all of your projects that you've done. It's not, oh, it was done in such date. It's timeless. So it's beautiful. And that bathroom with the wall, still I found outstanding every time I see it.
Stunning. Agreed. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
As designers, when you speak to homeowners, how does gender impact their needs and requests? And do you see a difference between a single client as opposed to couples? Garrow, I'll let you take the lead on this one.
Well, actually, it's funny you mentioned before that I've been on Open House TV a couple of times, and the most recent one, which was on Sunday, was for a bachelor's apartment, and I find that working for single bachelors and bachelorettes are actually sometimes the most interesting projects, because, rather than have the dynamic of working with two separate minds, a couple is often, they're diametrically opposite in terms of their design tastes, and that happens more often than not. But when you have a single person, it's really interesting, because you can really hone in on what their likes are, and I find that to be so much fun. For instance, that project that we did, he was really amenable to a lot of sort of, I would say that definitely the apartment had a masculine feeling to it. Like the kitchen, we made more like a bar. And even though he is an avid chef and cook, he does like to be more of like the make it feel like it's a bar. And of course, when it comes to men, I feel like their first question every time I have a meeting with a couple, the first question from the husband is, "Where's my TV going to be?" So it's an interesting way to work with. Gender is an interesting way to look at design, because you do tend to have a lot of varying requests from women versus men, and
sure.
Integrating that into a space is sometimes a challenge, but always fun.
So singles as opposed to couples, definitely a difference, and then between male and female too.
Totally.
You guys have your work cut up here.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes.
Trevor, any insights from your 35 years of doing this?
I'm tired.
No kidding. I'm sure sometimes you feel like you're a marriage counselor too.
Yes.
I would say that has happened many times in my career. I at the beginning of my career, I worked with another designer, Linda Borman, for 11 years, and she and I would double up with the couples, where she would become the ally of one of the partners and I would become the ally of the other, so that it never felt like either of us was
the bad guy,
ganging up with one against the other. Very, very interesting dynamic in those kinds of couple projects. But what I was going to say relative to what Garrow mentioned about working with bachelors, I had recently a very different experience in that we took what was a bungalow and turned it basically into a one-bedroom house, which he's in his early 60s, very well-traveled, great art collection, and interested in not moving to a condominium, but turning this this house that he purchased into a condominium on the ground, basically. And at the same time, he was building this thing that was so specific to how he was going to live in it, a one-bedroom house. He didn't want to make any final decisions that one of the women in my office hadn't been included in the decision, because he was certain that the house was going to be purchased at some time and the decision would be made by a woman. So even though we were designing for a bachelor, he wanted us to focus on making sure that the house wasn't gender specific, so that he could sell it later at the right, I guess, the right price. But for me, the bigger challenge was that he was making a one-bedroom house, and most people do not want a one-bedroom house.
Right. Case in point. Very good. And Theresa, have you noticed the difference between male, female, couples, and singles?
Yeah, I think the guys have kind of spoken to this, but I think it's a different kettle of, well, actually, maybe not with Trevor, but I was going to say for singles, a single client, sometimes that's a little easier because you're only dealing with what they want. Whereas with a couple, to Garrow's point, often there are differences, and that's our job to navigate that. And I wanted to show you one example of something where a couple had quite different needs. Because in this couple, the reason they called me was that they wanted to, their kitchen was just not working for them. She is a passionate baker, and he does all the everyday cooking for the family. So we've set up different zones for them. So this is the overall family. Like it's actually, if you go back to the previous one, the previous image, that is the overall kind of big family room, kitchen. Everyone congregates here. And then if we go to the next slide, this is what we call the baking center. So this was specifically designed with what her requirements were for baking. And what I like about this this idea is that I often will do a separate pantry for a client, so that if they were ever to sell the house, that this would certainly be transferable to that concept. Or if you were to have caterers, you could have the caterers in the separate pantry area. So I enjoyed this because it was something I hadn't come across before, where they had different skills that they wanted to, really be working in as a couple, and it ends up becoming part of the design. It becomes the interesting story of the design solution.
So all three of you, from what I hear, you actually help marriages stay together. The house becomes more happy.
Or not. Or not.
Whenever
you get that email where it's like, you tell him we're not doing red on the right. Blah, blah, blah. You're like, well, you guys sleep in the same bed together, so maybe you should tell him.
I love it. So this next topic, Trevor just kind of touched on it, which was good. Lifespan design is the approach that includes the living in place concept. As one of our experts consulted in the first study, award-winning gerontologist Patricia Moore defines living in place as a design initiative that insists, and I'll quote, "We all have a right to the home of our choosing for the entirety of our lives. At the very least," she says, "design must deliver on the promise of a dignified existence, and at its best, design helps us to thrive all our days." So, Trevor, I'm going to ask you this question first. Given the recent unfortunate effects of COVID outbreaks in retirement homes, do you anticipate that a demand in projects with the living in place philosophy will increase? Or this gentleman maybe wasn't thinking of that, but he's turned a bungalow to a one bedroom. As you said, that's his condo.
Mm-hmm. I think it's difficult to have one answer for this question. I think, in my practice, we've been working on seniors living buildings, and I would suggest that there is not going to be any kind of extreme vacancy because of COVID in these high-end rental buildings that are designed specifically for seniors, because the lifestyle that comes along with everything that exists in those facilities provides them with really a much better long-term solution as they age and don't want the maintenance required in a house. However, I've worked with many clients who are moving into, for example, downsizing into a condo and know that they're going to be there for the last 25 years of their life. And they plan for the different stages of health that they may experience during that period. They also a lot of times will make sure that they're split masters so that husbands and wives or caregivers have distance between if they have different schedules that they're keeping. There's so many things that go into being able to age in place properly that I think people are thinking about when they're building their house in their 30s, their 40s, and when they're changing their homes in their 70s and 80s. I had a couple he was in his early 90s and they were moving into a new condominium. And, there's quality of life that they all expect. And we design solutions that accommodate that.
That's great. Theresa or Garrow, do you have anything to add to what Trevor just said?
I agree with Trevor, and I think it is a complicated question to answer, and there are different answers to that. My parents actually still live in the house that we grew up in, and it's a large house, and we've approached them several times to say, are you interested in downsizing? No pressure, not to like make them do it if they don't want to, and they haven't wanted to do that. And yet, in Montreal, my next door neighbors, they're an elderly couple, and they're downsizing now, and they felt through the whole COVID crisis that they were very much feeling very alone at home because they do have a rather large house, and felt the maintenance was a little bit, outside their patience level. So it does vary, individual to individual. It's an interesting question, but I feel like it's a broad answer.
I'm just going to jump in there. You mentioned the sense of loneliness during this COVID period. My father-in-law has been alone in an apartment in Etobicoke for 5 or 6 months with very few visits. He's in his early 90s. And we approached him about potentially moving to a facility. And he was more than eager to consider that step because of the very fact that there would be social dynamics there that he doesn't have when he's aging in place. Yeah. He's much more interested in having a community and making friendships, and I just think that, again, there isn't one answer. It depends on who you are.
Yeah. Theresa, do you want to add anything to it, or?
Well, I'm only just smiling because my father was an irascible Irishman who really didn't like people a lot. Like, he really liked his own space. So
he liked me.
I'm just going to say that I think I completely agree with what Garrow and Trevor have said, that it's a complicated question to answer, which I think depends on the individual.
Yeah, there's so many things to consider. You're right. I mean, the question I think was posed because it's in a lot of people's minds based on what's been happening, but it's definitely not an easy answer. So I think you all three highlighted not all, there's more to it than that, but there's so many layers to consider. So, and also that retirement homes are not necessarily a bad thing. As Trevor said, there's a sense of community, and the person doesn't have to live alone. So there's many pluses to that. I guess it's so based on individual preferences. So if, let's say, a client said to you, I do want to have my house to be, allow me to live there forever, regardless of my physical status, what would be sort of the key? I mean, I'm sure there's so many. what would be some of the key components that you would be narrowing in on and say, these are sort of the things that we should be looking at? Who would like to start on that one? Anybody?
I can go. I would say that main floor access. I mean, if you're not in a condo, how are you going to get in to your house if you're in a wheelchair? And so, is there a possibility when we're doing landscape design to incorporate a ramp? You're going to need I'm thinking about residential, like home, like not condo, but an accessible washroom. Place that maybe a current room is a living room, but it can also be turned into a bedroom. I think those, to me, are like kind of key things to be able to incorporate on that ground level.
Has anybody seen a demand for elevators? So that if it's multi-level.
I have seen that, yes, and it's often a challenge to try and figure out where to put an elevator in a house that is the floor plan has already been worked out, and it's often coming through at different unusual places on multiple levels. And recently had actually a couple living in a townhouse in Manhattan where they wanted to put in an elevator, and it was quite a project, and we did end up putting it in, but it did affect bathrooms on almost every floor. So as a result, they ended up having to move out to have a rather extensive renovation of the house to accommodate that. But to Theresa's point, I think that it is important to understand how you can make your space flexible on the to have a first floor bedroom. For instance, my father has very bad knees, and he has trouble going up and down the stairs. And we've explored all sorts of avenues with him, and one of which is to give him the dining room, to convert the dining room on the first floor into a bedroom, which is the solution that I think we're leading towards. But and then handrails and bathrooms. Bathrooms for sure. I know the trend for me I've seen for showers is to eliminate that curb between where you enter from the bathroom into the shower. It seems to be a huge trip hazard, and everyone's always concerned about that. So sort of designing a bathroom floor that's pitched to the drain is
for sure.
an important concept these days.
And I know some builders have these really narrow entryways to bathrooms. If you've got a wheelchair, that's not going to work. So maybe just wider entryways as well, right?
Yeah, well, actually, just this morning I was at an apartment that was built in the. It's probably in New York. Most buildings are pre-war or post-war. This was a very unusual building. It was called a war building. So only like 10 or 15 buildings were actually built during the war in New York City, and this happened to be one of them. And the master bathroom door is 24 inches. And I stood there. I was like, wow, I'm a little person, and I feel little in this bathroom. So.
And those walls were, I'm sure, very thick. It's not like you
super thick. Yeah, it's a big project to cut out a wider opening there.
So another interesting.
I think on this point, Suzy, that one of the important things when you approach a solution that accommodates for universal design is that we almost always want to make it look like we hadn't considered universal design. That everything is designed so that it's concealed or just beautiful, not that we don't. The handrails are towel bars, and you conceal the solution so that it's not so hospital-like.
Right. That is a very key point. Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. I'm sure nobody wants to have a home that looks like a hospital, right? So you still want it to look like a welcoming house, for sure. So another interesting concept from the study was self-care, meaning the ability to independently take care of yourself. So some of the experts said that this will mean a decentralization, at the risk of just saying the opposite of what the study was saying earlier on. But so they were saying the concept would be so that the kitchen wouldn't be a series of interconnected cabinets, but rather they would be stations that had a specific function. For example, if one was not feeling well, you would roll into your bedroom the coffee or tea station and be able to make yourself a nice warm cup of tea or something without having to leave your bedroom. Now, do you see anything like this happening or in the future? Keep in mind that out of North America, I'm told places like Germany, like some European countries, when you rent a space, there is the space allocated for the cabinets, the kitchen cabinets to go. So the plumbing is there, but each renter, surprisingly enough, takes their cabinets along to their next space. So they're closer to this concept than we are. I still can't wrap my head around it. But what are your thoughts? Garrow?
Well, it seems a little crazy, like that that your cabinetry can actually fit from one apartment to the next. But the trend here I've seen is to create a midnight bar. So it's not so much a piece of millwork that gets moved into the room or not, but it's actually designed and integrated into the actual function of the bedroom. And where it houses an ice maker and an under cabinet fridge, and oftentimes you see an Instahot, where you can have tea and a coffee machine. So that I do feel like, well, especially in the era where houses are so gigantic that it takes 40 minutes to walk to the kitchen, and you don't want to do that at night. That the midnight bar is what we're calling it now. The midnight bar is an essential part of the master suite.
I've never heard of that terminology. I like that, midnight bar.
The midnight
that makes
bar.
a lot of sense. By the time you
we
get
just did one where we put a de Gournay wallpaper all over. It's very fancy.
You have to send us a picture. I'd love to see that.
Yes.
How about Theresa? What do you think?
I don't know. I'm like Garrow. I cannot imagine like the moving of your millwork from your current place to the next. It just feels, because even IKEA is built for the space. So maybe there's more of a uniformity where they're doing this in terms of space. So that would be my take on moving millwork. I would say that.
Trevor, do you see this happening in North America anytime soon?
I don't. I really think this is definitely a European old city, old architecture kind of experience, and that in North America, just with how our clients' expectations and the public's expectations for everything to basically come across as flawless, built-in, custom, it's not the kind of thing that is going to be, I don't think, ever taken on here.
It's not going to fly.
I don't see it. Even in small condominium developments where the kitchen is 8 feet long and all on one wall, it just has to be so customized in order for it to be accommodated and fit in. Even at that price point, it wouldn't be accepted by the general public.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Totally agree.
So outdoor spaces, our savior for the last, I don't know how many months. It's been such an important space for all of us. I mean, I think a lot of us would have lost our sanities if that wasn't there. But how do you approach design when working for an outdoor on an outdoor project? Do consumers want something different, or what are they asking for? Trevor, do you want to lead this one?
Sure. We do a lot of projects where the indoor space and the outdoor space are seamlessly connected together. A lot of things in the Bahamas, in West Palm Beach, for example, where they need to be entertaining inside and outside, and exterior kitchens, interior kitchens. It just is inherent in most of the projects we work on. Even in Canada, where we have very short summers, people want to be able to entertain outside. Have I frozen?
No. We're
Okay.
hearing, I'm listening intently to what you're saying.
Great.
Theresa, do you have any insight on this?
Yeah, I think to Trevor's point that yes, it's definitely a connection from the inside to the outside. And as we look at the space in the same way that we would the interior. So we're looking at space planning, functional requirements, lighting, particular and outside watering systems. So I think that the principles are there. And like this example here of a kitchen or a garden that I designed, like one of the things that I think are important, especially as you say now more than ever, is to have different sitting areas so that you can see on the second off of the French doors, there's one sitting area down to another area so that you can have physical distancing. Like this is, as you say, been our lifesaver in COVID. Another thing I like to incorporate is a water feature. I think there's a sense of peace that comes to gardens when you have the sound of the water, and also a sense of enclosure, as well as an openness. Here you can see that the trees create a sense of enclosure. So those are some of the features that I try and incorporate, and also separate entrance so that you're not going through the house. I mean, that's a COVID thing, and also to have a washroom like that. In that last project, there's a washroom off of the side building, the separate coach house, so that again you've got separation. And in this case, you could even make that into a home office. So again, I guess as well, flexibility is something that's important right now.
For sure. How about you, Garrow? What's your take on this?
Well, absolutely agree with both panelists, and I think that the bottom line is really bespoke design. Everybody's looking for something that's a little bit personal, and especially now looking for something that's going to allow them to sort of have a getaway, an escape from the reality of the world. And even still, that Canada has such a short season, summer season. In Montreal, it's already winter. I left yesterday; it was really cold. But it's even more important than to have an outdoor space, because when the warm weather does come, they embrace living outdoors so much that it is absolutely essential that it be seamless with their interior living, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Of course. And one thing that I don't know whether it's across the board, but in Toronto, because of the cool weather, they're going to be allowing restaurants to have heated spaces so that people can stay out longer. And I remember thinking about this myself back in March or April, about having a heated space in my own backyard. And I'm probably like a million people who's going to be looking for solutions about how to stay out as long as possible.
For sure. When we think of outdoor space, normally we think of a house with a large exterior space, but obviously that's not the case for all of us, especially in urban dense living, where it's a condominium or a house with a small space. How would you treat this? Garrow, I think you probably live, designing in Manhattan, New York. You've got good
well,
sense
actually in my apartment here, I have a 2-foot little Juliet balcony outside my living room, and it's actually quite a nice little outdoor space, even though it's tiny. Sitting out there is actually really nice, and everyone, all my friends who come over who don't have outdoor space are like, "Oh my God, you're so lucky you have an outdoor space." I'm like, "Well, it's not really an outdoor space. So you come to my house in Montreal to have a real outdoor space."
Yeah.
But it is, it's one of those key components that when you do have an outdoor space, and even when you have actually small space to design, it becomes even more critical to sort of design it well so that it can actually function the way you need it to. So.
Right.
I think also when you have unlimited space in a massive backyard, sprawling space, you probably want to look at making intimate small spaces happen inside of that, so that you can get that great sense of intimacy.
Right. So a small space doesn't necessarily mean it's not negative. You just have that one small space, where in a larger space, you probably have, as you pointed out, multiples of that intimate spaces, which makes sense. Theresa, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I was going to ask the other two whether they've ever done like an indoor, like let's say you don't have a garden or even your 2-foot terrace, of doing like indoor kind of green wall or something, or even I have visions of perhaps even like growing your own vegetables through the winter with a proper lighting system. I mean, I have not done that, but I think that's what I was thinking about.
I had a client once that was had traveled extensively to India for work and had become enamored with Indian culture. So we designed a tented room for her. We called it the India room, and the center of the ceiling had a canvas tent that came out and covered the the perimeter walls, and it really felt like an outdoor space when we were done with it. It was actually remarkable.
So you just did the reverse.
Yeah.
The outdoors in.
It just reminded me of that.
Yeah, no, that's great.
So that's funny you mentioned that, Theresa, because the study, not that, I want to be all doom and gloom, but the experts were saying that we're going to be experiencing a food shortage and that we will have to be growing our own produce some way or another, which some of us that do not have a green thumb, thank God we have a husband that does, might be able to grow. But they were saying, small enclosures, maybe shared gardens, and maybe even an indoor space as a vertical garden. So I was just wondering whether you've been incorporating these into your projects even more so, or do you think there's a demand for that? Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. I don't know who to be first.
That one was a tricky question for me because I have been cooking during COVID, but I'm not, I know that if I had the time to cook, that I would love to actually take my time and do it carefully and do it really well. But I'm so busy with work that I find over the past, 2 decades, I've had no time to cook. And I find it really, perplexing to think that, there's, inability to purchase food, to purchase fresh produce and actually have that available. So I haven't seen any of my clients who've asked me to design some in gardens for them to grow food. But my sister happens to be an avid gardener, and she has actually been distributing fresh vegetables to everybody in the family all summer long.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's been fun.
So maybe
but the winter comes quickly.
Yeah, I know, right? Theresa, do you have anything to add to that? I mean, you started the topic anyway. You started it.
I mean, it is concerning when you say we're going to have food shortages. So, I mean, I know that for personally, we did some planter boxes on the side of our house. So I have tomatoes and basil and whatnot. So I do think that that's something that will perhaps, not just because we need the food, but also I think psychologically, I think it's good to have green around you and with our long winters. So I think that's a place for growth.
Yeah. How about you, Trevor? Have you seen a lot of indoor spaces or outdoor vegetable gardens? And
I would say very few. It's such a specific requirement if somebody is that intent on in acquiring their own food sources. We've had a couple of clients who, because the zoning bylaws have changed in Toronto, are raising chickens. So, it's for eggs and meat and right. I just find that most clients are jumping on the food delivery bandwagon, organic food, vegetables, meats, and they just have it delivered to their home every 2 weeks. They get a box. And condominiums as well. In condominium lobbies, there's stacks and stacks and stacks of these kinds of things being delivered. And I think that is likely the more frequent outcome of a food shortage or not wanting to go to a store to buy it.
Right. You just reminded me, I was having a conversation with Sharon Portelli from Arito last week, and she said that there's people can come together and actually own a cow on an organic farm, and then you get pieces of the cow. Mm-hmm. Who knew? You can have your organic cow, and you could even pick the type of cow. There's different types. So things that you learn. If you're designing with the objective to have hygiene in mind, so if clients are saying they want products with low porosity, like really easy to clean, maybe even low VOCs, do you think if you have to kind of address that request, you're giving up something aesthetically, or are you finding products that would allow you to have both? We'll start with Trevor today. This time, not today.
I don't think you ever have to give up on great design products for any of those reasons. Touchless faucets, beautiful options now. Non-porous countertops, many options. I just don't think that it's limiting in any way with the number of manufacturers and suppliers that we have access to from around the world and locally, that it's a challenge. I haven't seen it.
Yeah, good. Absolutely. I think vendors have definitely jumped on that bandwagon and addressed people's concerns, especially in the paint category. You know, I'd say about 15, 20 years ago, there was like that concern about the paint, the off-gassing of the paints, yeah. And that was actually very well addressed. And, I feel like Trevor's absolutely right. I don't think it ever impedes any of our design, work. In fact, it's one of the factors that we take into consideration now.
I actually miss those. I became a designer because I love the toxic fumes.
I like it too. It's oddly enough.
Yeah, all that high gloss sheen.
So how has the material selection changed, or has it, now that we talk about hygienic spaces, or hygiene is more of a factor? Teresa, do you want to lead this?
Sure. So you're like, Suzy, you're asking which materials or which?
So I'm saying, has there been a change? Clients asking for more hygienic surfaces, and if so, do you have something that's your go-to in terms of product? First, is there more of a demand? Is it a key factor? And
you know what? To be honest, I don't see the hygiene as being something I'm seeing a huge uptick in. I think easy to care for materials such as like not using natural stone, but using, say, something like what Cosentino offers, which is Decton or silestone. So you get the beauty of the material without the care that's involved with, say, a marble countertop.
More porous, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Garrow?
Yeah, I think that it is a maintenance issue. A lot of people just want zero maintenance, and which is 100%, comes into the conversation about kitchen countertops, which is, thankfully there are companies like Cosentino where we can actually get, materials that actually are very, very strong, and they're not porous and they don't stain. That's actually a silestone countertop in that kitchen there. Oh. And I think it maybe the conversation will go more towards hygiene, but I think mostly the conversations we have with our clients is about maintenance. So, I really don't want, to have to, make sure that I'm sealing this every 6 months. It just has to be like I could put a hot pot on it without, destroying it or whatnot.
Right. Okay. And there's been so much emphasis on the digital world recently, and how has social media impacted you, whether you're at work or you're with your clients or your business. Trevor, would you like to start with that one?
This is also a difficult question to answer. Social media, I think, has made everything even seem more accessible than it has in the past. I think there's a lot of pieces of social media, Instagram, Pinterest, that are basically, the modern version of HGTV, which has in design circles occasionally a bad rap because it presents things that are not necessarily real, with no budgets, and they happen overnight. And I think now with social media like Instagram and Pinterest, everyone believes they can curate something fantastic, and those pictures are easily converted in their minds into a great solution for their homes. And that is not really how the design process works.
Yeah.
I believe in all of these social media outlets, and I've always been a big proponent for HGTV, because I think it helps educate the public as to what possibility is out there. And in that sense, it increases the potential for all of us to have more clients.
Theresa or Garrow, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I completely agree with Trevor. I think that, the whole internet thing has opened up the door, the Pandora's box. I used to work for William Hodgins in Boston many years ago. And he was sort of the last of the great designers that, the clients were almost like they were demystified by this man. And, because these sources were all just magical and nobody had, knew where anything was coming from. Whereas now, they go online and they send you like 50 emails overnight and like, well, how about this lantern? How about this lantern? How about this lantern? And you're like, oh my God, shoot me. But to that point, to be honest with you, I over the COVID situation, I have had a tremendous boom in my business through my Instagram. Thankfully, we have a prolific Instagram following, and I'm thankful to all my followers. If you don't follow me, you can follow me at Garrow Kedigian on Instagram. And I got several projects from just doing my home tours. I know, Suzy, you mentioned that you watched a couple of those videos.
Enjoyed them.
But to Trevor's point, the thing that I always find so funny is that people will write me a message and say, "Oh, why have you posted like more than one picture of this room?" I'm like, "Well, I actually, it took me 2 years to do this room, so it just happened like in 1 minute. So I think I can post like a couple of pictures of it, Like,
I didn't even ask that.
you don't realize what goes into putting together, those spaces. It's so much hard work, and of course it's like it has to look flawless and seamless for somebody swiping, but they don't realize that their 1 second swipe through your picture is you're swiping across somebody's hard work.
Yeah, for sure. Theresa, have you had any changes with? Have you noticed anything differently with COVID and all this extra attention on social media and digital?
Well, I think to Garrow's point, I think that the internet and social media has made kind of a seismic change in our industry because, it's demystified it, and there is a sense out there that anybody could do this, and we all know that that's not true. In our business, but I find often you are doing a lot of education to clients to say that, no, this isn't going to happen over, a weekend. And there is a process, and that's how you get meaningful, rich, layered spaces. So that would be my take on it. And I have to say, personally, I have a love-hate relationship with it. And I'm totally impressed with Garrow that he is doing a lot of Instagramming, because I think, as business owners, we're told, okay, it's really important to be involved with this, but at the same time, I find it quite distracting, and if I'm not always in the mood to do it, so that is always a conundrum for me. So that sometimes I'm very active, and sometimes and quite fallow, which I know is probably not the ideal, way to use Instagram.
But I understand you.
Completely agree. Yes, it's become more of a chore than fun. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And I've started to think that Pinterest has ruined Google. Every time I Google something, all I get is Pinterest pages.
I know. I hate that.
So now we're going to go on to a question because people have been posting questions. Andres is asking, what is the trend to open concept kitchen versus closed concept? My own trend is to go back to the separate kitchens and dining room to rescue the concept of enjoying cooking and dining as separate activities. Garrow, do you want to?
Absolutely. I'm of the background. If I'm going to be cooking a meal, the kitchen's going to look like a disaster. Trust me. So I don't want to have to spend like half an hour cleaning up before the guests come. So that I'd rather just close the door to the kitchen and pretend like that space doesn't exist while I'm entertaining them in the dining room, for sure. So I'm actually. I like to have separate strings of spaces. So even if there's a large opening that can be shut off to the main dining room from adjacent to the kitchen, I would prefer that than it be completely open. Right. That's actually my house in Montreal, and it is adjacent to the kitchen, and the kitchen is fairly closed off from this space, and there is a doorway. And oftentimes when I do have guests over for dinner, they're not allowed going in the kitchen because it's a disaster.
Well, maybe they should go in there to help you. No? What kind of guests are these? So now that our audience have gotten to know you a little bit better, I was just wondering if there's anything that you're excited about that you wanted to highlight. We'll start with Trevor, Theresa, and then Garrow. Trevor, do you want to, apart from maybe you being CEO of IDC?
Well, I now have this great, exciting new position at the Interior Designers of Canada, and I just wanted to mention that next Wednesday, September 23rd, the Value of Design Awards will be held virtually, and I encourage anyone who's interested to contact us through the website idcanada.org and potentially join us. Theresa has been the recipient of these awards in the past, and I may see her there next week. I'm not sure. Anyway, Thank you very much, Suzy. I appreciate the time.
Oh, likewise. Theresa, do you want to tell us something you're excited about?
Well, I'm going to encourage people to follow me on Instagram, and maybe this will inspire me to be more active there. And just to put it out there that, I think we're all in this business. It's a passion, and it's about getting to know our clients and really creating a home that they are nurtured in, that's unique to them. And so I would just say that, I'm always happy to speak to people and meet them. So would love to hear from anybody who's watched this and might have further questions.
Beautiful. And last but not least, Mr. Garrow.
Well, I'm excited. Obviously Instagram, I've always enjoyed that. And for those of you who don't follow me, it's Garrow K Designs on Instagram. But I also just recently started a YouTube page, and it's called Garrow K Designs on YouTube. And I'm actually have been enjoying doing tours of the Golden Square Mile. I started over COVID, where I would do extensive walks through the downtown neighborhood in Montreal called the Golden Square Mile, where 90% of Canada's wealth was concentrated in this square mile in downtown Montreal. And there's these magnificent mansions that have remained. They're still there. And I've started these tours, and were so enjoyable to do. I was posting them on Instagram, and so many people were messaging me that somebody told me that you have to start a YouTube page on this, which I did. So I'm excited about that.
To break Instagram.
Maybe it'll fix Google.
So I just wanted to thank you, the three of you, on behalf of myself and Cosentino and our audience. I know all of you are extremely busy. Just getting down a date was a challenge, which I appreciate. And it was just a lot of fun. Appreciate the time. Hope to do it again soon. And of course, I'd like to thank our audience because, you know, we put on these webinars, but if there's nobody listening, what's the point? And we know how busy you are. So we do appreciate your time as well. We hope everybody stays safe and really look forward to seeing you next time around. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Suzy.
Bye.
Thank you.